Let's venture down into Lisbon and talk about the Blue Devils, what they have returning, and what they're looking to replace come 2021.
Well, Lisbon was actually a very interesting team last year because the quote unquote regular season, the first 6 games of the season, they struggled a bit, a 1-5 record. But the after season, the postseason, and if you got eliminated from the postseason, you could schedule those last few games too. They did really well. They actually ended up finishing the season 4-7, playing 11 games. So ended up getting 3 wins in the last few games that they played. So really kind of turned it around towards the end of the season, and actually offense figured it out. They were the 4th highest scoring team in the EOAC, averaged just over 22 points per game. And I mean, the Blue Devils were a team offensively too. They're returning a few starters, 5 starters from last year's team, and a couple of them are going to be young guys. Hunter Daly on the offensive line is going to be a guy I think to watch for. Tyler Palmer going to be on the offensive line as well. Ryan Preston's going to be their senior offensive lineman, but there's 3 guys right there that is like going to be the core, I think, on that offensive line, and is really going to provide a lot of protection this year for Trevor Sifke, the quarterback for Lisbon this year. He's going to be a sophomore. He's very young. They're putting him into a system very young, but they want to put this young guy into the system because they want him to come up through the ranks. They want him to learn and get better each year, and they think he's the guy to start as a sophomore too. And hey, man, this is the time to do it. They have also another good fullback too, and Ryan Stauffer. That's going to be interesting because they're going to use him in a lot of blocking schemes too. I think Trevor Seifke is going to be used a lot too in running schemes, and you got a nice blocker in Stauffer up front that's going to get you those lead blocks and really create a little bit more open gaps for you and let you get a few more yards down the field.
Yeah, and Lisbon was a team, even when they were struggling, and like you said, they were 1-5 for the first 6 games. There were a lot of games in that stretch where they were competitive for at least a half of the game, and they just couldn't keep up. But you could see there were things there in the team. They weren't just lost in the water. They weren't getting they weren't getting boat raced. There were definitely signs of encouragement. And I think they proved that when they finished the season 4-7 after going 1-5 to start. When you include the playoffs and the games they're able to schedule after the playoffs. So I think they kind of proved themselves that they weren't completely just trying to figure it out, or they like in the 1-5 season, you could tell they were trying to put it together, but the pieces were there. They kind of started to put it together towards the end of the season, and they're bringing a lot back, especially like you said, the core offensive linemen. They're going to be a team that people should have to watch out for this year. Not a rollover team in the EOAC.
Yeah, and I mean, Trevor Seifke was a guy that only took, I believe, he only passed maybe 15 times last year, had a touchdown. I think he completed about half of those passes. So, I mean, he's a guy that was very fresh. We only saw him a handful of times. He was a freshman, though. So, I mean, coming into the sophomore year, I think this is really going to be interesting to see because he's coming into his first year as a starter. So now, it's big time now, kid, and you're here as a sophomore. Not many kids start as a sophomore quarterback, too. So, I mean, to get the starting nod as a sophomore, you get this year in the system. You had a year under the system, but now you get 3 in front of you to really play in it. You got a great offensive line in front of you that you know is going to provide the protection. You got some threats at wide receiver. You can make something go. I'm interested to see what this kid's got this year.
And at least he's not getting thrown to the wolves. He does have game experience. Like you said, he got his feet wet his freshman year. Maybe not starting, maybe not starting, but he's still got game experience. He's not going to be looking like a deer with his eyes in the headlights. Like, oh my gosh, this is varsity now.
He got his first touchdown pass a year ago, so he doesn't have to worry. There's no butterflies about having to get that out of the way. He already got that done and out of the way last year. So, I mean, you shouldn't have to worry about that coming into this year. But no, a lot of great blocking up front for him. And I think that's going to be the key to Lisbon's offensive success is keeping those offensive linemen healthy. Because if they are, there's going to be the core, and they're pretty solid offensive line.
I wonder how much teams are going to try to blitz Lisbon to try to make their sophomore quarterback uncomfortable. And then in retrospect, to counter how many times Lisbon's going to be able to use draws and, quick passes in the flats to really counter those blitzes.
Yeah, and got to remember, there's not really a book on this kid either. So a lot of teams are going to come in here and they're going to have to try to experiment. I mean, you only have a little bit of tape on him. You see what he does, but you haven't really seen his full game, and he hasn't really unleashed his full self. I can't imagine in just 15 pass attempts. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. Lisbon might come out of the gates really hot because nobody knows what to expect from this quarterback.
Yeah, if you can pick apart a kid after 15 passes on film, then you are a film genius, and you should be working with Ron Jaworski, not a head coach on the high school level.
Yeah.
Talk about Lisbon's defense, by the way, and the other side of the ball, and what to expect from the Blue Devils on that side.
They were solid last year. They're a defense that allowed about 26, 27 points per, but they're returning a bunch of starters from last year. We'll talk a little bit about the guys they lost. Ryan McCullough, which is a guy that was both on defensive back, but he was also a running back. He was their star running back last year too. So just to take reverse skate, go into offense a little bit, Ryan McCullough is another big loss for them running back wise, and he is now also defensive back wise. Abram Sims, linebacker too for them. Braden Joy, defensive lineman. RJ Schreffler, linebacker. All guys that they lost, but returning 8 starters, and amongst those 8 starters, guys like Logan Stauffer, like we mentioned his name on offense, here he is on defense, sophomore defensive back, man. Ryan Stauffer, the linebacker, another guy we mentioned too, senior linebacker for them. Damian McCormick, another linebacker, and they got Aiden Colvin, defensive back. They got really, really good secondaries here, and they also got that second line of defense. Their linebacker core is pretty solid as well. The defensive line, there might be a little bit of questions on them, but they got some size too. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these offensive linemen are playing both ways. I wouldn't be surprised to see some big seasons from them as well too. But I think this defense is going to be really good, and I think they're going to be really fun to watch, and I think they're going to be really hard to pass on as well, because I think these linebackers they do really good job filling those holes and blocking the run. But I mean, couple of them, they could go back out and they could defend the pass too, and that's huge against passing quarterbacks as well.
We've talked a lot this year about teams that were young last year, went through growing pains, but now you got to watch out for them this year because they went through those growing pains for a reason. Lisbon can fit that boat too, especially on defense. They're returning a lot of experience, and there are plenty of reasons to think why Lisbon's defense will be well improved and maybe go from 27 a game to closer to 20 a game this year.
If they're one of those teams too, and I mean, I think if Lisbon is a team that can really make that big jump on defense, if they can make a huge improvement in, I mean, already a solid defense, but if they could do that where they're holding teams around 20 or under 20, this is a team that's going to win a lot more games than they did last year. And this is going to be a team we're talking about being in playoff contention late in the season.
Still overall a young team too. I mean, still going to have to lean on a handful of guys to be leaders.
You got a sophomore quarterback in there now, but I mean, if you're Lisbon, you're really excited for this year and the next few looking forward.
And no matter what year you are, you put in the quarterback spot, automatically you're a leader. You have to be a leader. So we're going to learn a lot about that kid's ability to lead as a sophomore and how much he's able to earn the respect of that locker room as a sophomore. That's going to tell a lot about how successful Lisbon's going to be.
I agree. I absolutely agree. But I think it's going to be fun, and it's going to be interesting to see because there's no tape really on him. There's not much tape on him. So we're about to learn a lot about him with everybody else.
I think he's going to grow up right in front of our eyes. And let's talk about what he'll have to face to Lisbon's schedule. You said they could come out of the gate strong. What's their non-conference schedule look like?
They're going at Wyndham to start, and then they go home versus Mineral Ridge, and then at Toronto to finish September 3rd. So, I mean, you look at a couple of those games, they're going to be tested, but I mean, it's definitely going to be fun to watch. And I think especially that Mineral Ridge game, that August 27th game is going to be really fun to watch.
Well, since 2 out of those 3 aren't to YSN schools, we can confidently say 2-1, at least 2-1 out of that first 3.
You would think so too, because I think with Lisbon's defense, if it comes back stronger or even as strong as it was last year, and just to see what this offense is, if it's dynamic and what it can be, I think is really interesting. And I think 2-1 is not unrealistic expectations at all from the first 3 games of the season if you are Lisbon. But I do think we're going to have to see, though. We're going to have to see as the game progresses, too, how these young guys really are filling in, how they react when something doesn't go right, and how they're able to respond to that, too. It's going to be interesting to see because
you bring up a good point, because eventually he's going to throw an interception. It's going to happen. It happens to everybody. how does he respond to it? We don't.
Yeah.
You know, I
And,
mean,
and that's going to be the interesting thing, and that's the telling sign for all young teams is when something doesn't go right, because inevitably it isn't. There's going to be a part in the game at some point, at
yeah,
some game,
you
something's not
can't
going to go right.
you can't go through a football season without at least one valley. I
Yeah.
mean, no one
Every defensive back gets burned. Every wide receiver misses a catch. Not everybody's perfect, and that's a beautiful thing about sports. But it's how you react to those things when you don't, and that's where you see the older guys how they react and why they're the leaders on the team, and why sometimes younger guys need that year or more of maturity. So it's all about to see how those younger guys, how do they react? Do they completely fall apart? Is something when something doesn't go their way? Are they able to confidently respond and just get back out there on the field? So it's going to be interesting.
Lisbon would love a 2-1 start. Let's look at what they would face in the EOAC if they did start 2-1 to continue their season.
You go September 10th at Southern Local, September 17th home versus Valley Christian, September 24th home versus East Palestine, October 1st home versus Wellsville, October 8th at Latonia, October 15th home versus United, and October 22nd home versus Columbiana. So they're one of those teams that have 6 home games this season on the docket. And I mean, I think all the home games too, with the exception of maybe Latonia and Southern, but I think a lot of the home games are favorable matchups, especially those last 2, United and Columbiana.
Yeah, and I think when I'm looking at matchups in the EOAC, the one that really excites me again for Lisbon, and the one that was a really good game last year is Wellsville.
And I mean, coming right there at October 1st, that's right after they face Valley Christian and East Palestine, 2 games too, where again, those can go either way. But I mean, if they go Lisbon's way, and we said 2-1 those first 3 games, so you might be looking at a 4-2 or 5-2, something like that going into October 1st. So you could be looking at 4-2, 3-3, going into October 1st. 3-3, this is a telling game for the playoffs, because you win this game, that's 4-3, and you have a pretty good shot looking at the last 3 games. That if you win 1, maybe 2 of those, you have a good shot. If you're 4-2, this almost guarantees you a spot or a chance in the playoffs if you get this, and this is win number 5 for you.
Right, I think 5 wins and 5-2, unless there's an implosion, you're pretty set for the playoffs.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with you, Anthony. If definitely looking at the schedule, and if Lisbon gets some wins too, and has that strong non-conference schedule or a winning non-conference schedule, this is going to be a game that really might have huge playoff implications on the line.